The last part of passive transport is what we call facilitated diffusion. Obviously, it's still going to be diffusion, but what it means to facilitate something is to assist progress of something. What we are facilitating to diffuse across the membrane is going to be types of molecules that wouldn't normally be able to cross and diffuse over. If you go back to your membrane permeability notes, not everything is just going to be able to pass through it. So we had most likely and least likely. Most likely were small, nonpolar, and uncharged molecules. Then we had small, polar, and uncharged. A little bit less likely. Then we had large, polar, and uncharged. Now you're also having size becoming an issue. And the least likely were those charged ions. So, given the context of passive transport, those small, nonpolar, and uncharged, those are going to be diffusion, because the tails are fine with those being nonpolar. So you're just going to get those passing through the membrane. Small, polar, and uncharged, and large, polar, and uncharged. Remember, water is a polar molecule. You can't just have it go through the membrane on its own. So this is where facilitated diffusion comes into play. So let's give ourselves a definition of facilitated diffusion. Remember, I'm going to write this again. There is no energy required for this to happen. And because it's diffusion, we're going to have movement across the cell membrane. And again, because it's passive transport, it has to be going down its concentration gradient. And we also need some help to be able to make this happen, because these things normally won't go through the membrane on their own. So we can't just have normal diffusion. We're really going to have movement across the cell membrane down the concentration gradient through membrane proteins. And these membrane proteins we call integral proteins. I want us to write down that these integral proteins, we're not going to include aquaporins in that. We're going to exclude water. Water has osmosis going for it, so we don't have to feel bad about excluding it from facilitated diffusion. Aquaporins are still membrane proteins that allow for water to move down its concentration gradient. But for facilitated diffusion, we're not talking about water. So let's make a sketch that describes facilitated diffusion. Like we usually do, we're going to start with our membrane. I'm going to say outside is on the left, inside's on the right. I'm going to draw in a little ovally shape, and I'm going to say that is an integral membrane protein to allow for facilitated diffusion. And to remind us that we need very specific protein channel for our specific type of compound that we're working with, I will do them in the same color. These are going to be little squares. I'm going to make our squares be compound Y. Our triangles, remember, were compound X. Our squares are going to be compound Y. So we have a situation set up here where there is a concentration gradient. We have 5 over here and 1 over here. He's a little sad. And we're also having this situation where there is random molecular motion, but anytime it gets to the membrane, it's just going to bounce off. And so you can imagine all of these moving at once. They're moving around through random molecular motion. And again, I abbreviate that often just by writing RMM. Sometimes you get this motion and then they hit the integral membrane protein channel. That is a great thing when we're considering our need for equilibrium. Because this guy's moving around, he's doing his own thing. He may hit the membrane a couple times and bounce off, but he hits the membrane protein and he's able to pass through to the other side, where he's going to randomly molecularly move. And so now, because this square I'm representing over here, it is no longer over here. So now I have 4 on one side and 2 on the other. We still have a concentration gradient here. We still need to adjust what's going on. Maybe this one's off doing its own thing over here, but maybe this one is randomly moving and it is the one to touch the membrane protein and get sent across. So we're going to pretend that that is what happened. And so now we mark this one out. This one has moved through the protein and is now on the outside of the cell. The result is that we have 3 squares on one side and 3 squares on the other. And this has allowed us to get to an equilibrium of concentration.